But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to explore gifts from Venus and the fall of the giants. We'll be continuing tonight and concluding our series in a book titled The Story of Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria, written by one Mr. W. Scott Elliot, a Theosophist. That's right, this gentleman was part of the Theosophical Society and espoused many of their beliefs, and he put it into writing in this book. And this book contains a lot of interesting details about not only the Atlantean race, but also their predecessor, the Lemurian race. And we have been exploring this. This is part 3 of the 3-part series, looking into this book and these ideas. And this is the perspective and the approach taken by the Theosophists towards this hidden knowledge, this secret doctrine that all of the various secret society groups and occult fraternities claim to have in their possession. They claim this is from very old secret hidden records of the various occult fraternities, and these are some of the secrets of the ages that they've kept from the masses for a very long time now. So we were talking about how this Lemurian race, these predecessors of mankind, they were actually giants, according to the mystery schools here. They were giants, ranging in height from 12 to 15 feet tall, or taller. They had a third eye on the back of their head. You can't make this stuff up. This is what they claim in these secret society groups. And they were able to move backwards as easily as forwards, and I think this may be where the legend of the Cyclops may have come from. And we have this whole idea of what is called Cyclopean architecture out there, which was given a modern veneer in recent years, a fresh coating of paint, and they called it Tartaria. Although you'll see that the ideas present here are much older than this rise of this idea of Tartaria, or the Great Tartarian Empire, associated with this modern version of what they call a mud flood. We've explored these ideas in the past here, speaking on these things, and we're showing you where this comes from. It comes directly from the secret schools. It's a type of revelation of the method of sorts. These are what they claim is the actual secret history of the earth before the flood, in the antediluvian times, when Atlantis existed, and prior to Atlantis. That's what this Lemurian race was. They were the predecessors of the Atlanteans. They were proto-humans of sorts. Not fully human in the way we would think of them now, but they were our predecessors, and you can see A lot of these teachings have wormed their way into the scientific community, and they've appeared as Darwinian evolution. And of course, they're never straight with you about anything with this. But all of these undergirding ideas prop up that whole set of circumstances and properties that they apply in the name of Darwinian evolution, and honestly, doesn't have anything to really back it up. But they will claim that it does. They will force the square peg into the round hole and make it all fit together in their scientific paradigm, and if you don't agree with them, well, you just get shadow banned or censored. You don't get to actually demonstrate your findings or your experiments contradicting what their accepted worldview is. That's right. The peer review process will toss you right out. If you don't agree with what the standard is that's presented, and we see a lot of this goes against what the standard accepted paradigm is that is presented in the scientific framework, but you can also see how some of the undergirding ideas come directly from these secret teachings, or the secret doctrine, as they call it. So, continuing where we left off. Where we left off was the demise of the Lemurian race, the last Lemurian race, and the rise of the first Atlantean race. Now, Lemuria was the southern continent, and the Earth had gone through many different transformations and still continues to do so today. Where the land exists now was once the sea, and where the sea exists now was once the land. And they make all these different claims in the secret schools, and they try to back up some of what they claim with geological evidence and what they consider to be the most modern scientific evidence to back their claims. Even if it doesn't match their claims or later proves to be false, they still will back it up with these ideas. And that's where we're at now. So this Lemurian race was beginning to give way, and of course it took a lot of time for that to happen, for the Lemurians to evolve into the Atlantean race. Well, this took millions and millions of years. Gotta love it. When you can't explain something, or you can't demonstrate something, simply insert a vast amount of time between the advent of these things, and that gives plausible explanation, according to science, right? So that's what they've done, and we see this still goes on today with these concepts of Darwinian evolution. But where we left off, the Lemurians, they had actually done some things, lived in a way wherein they mindlessly committed sins of various sorts, interbred with beasts of the earth and begat monsters and things like this. This is according to what they teach in the secret doctrine. This is also demonstrable if you go back and you look in the stories of the book of Enoch and some of the other things associated with Genesis chapter 6 and the Nephilim, or the giants, that are presented there. So we have a lot of crossover, and maybe there are some kernels of truth to some of this. I don't know. I don't claim to know. I'm just telling you what it is they teach in their secret society groups and these occult fraternities when you get to a high enough level. And if you're interested enough in learning the secret doctrine, this is what they tell you and what they teach you, and they present it as fact. Don't ever adequately explain where the information comes from, but they say they keep secret records. And these secret records have been passed down through time, and they make these different claims. So, towards the end of this Lemurian civilization, there were other beings who began to indwell here. These beings being from what they call the Venus chain of evolution, where their humanity is much more highly evolved than our humanity right now, and they are considered divine. So these divine beings began to indwell in the end phases of the Lemurian epoch, in the beginning phases of the Atlantean epoch, and it was at this time that man began to evolve into modern man with this first Atlantean race. So these beings who decided to come indwell here from Venus to come help, out of the goodness of their hearts, to help the evolution and development of mankind here, from these sinful, mindless beings that were the Lemurian race, helping them evolve to the next level. They came here out of the goodness of their heart, and they did so, and they acted as rulers in positions of power to perform this task. And we'll pick up from there, because you see there's a lot more interesting details that we didn't cover at the end of the last show that I hinted and alluded to. And we're going to cover that now. So, these beings who came from the Venus chain of evolution here and indwelt, they did so for the benefit of the sin of the mindless and the consequences that were to be reaped by this. So, doing so, they helped to guide the evolution of these creatures to the next phase here. And it says, it must be remembered that up to this time the Lemurian race consisted of the second and third groups of the lunar Petries, but now they were approaching the level reached on the lunar chain by the first group of Petries, and it became necessary for these again to return to incarnation. And this they did through the 5th, 6th, and 7th sub-races of the Lemurians, and indeed some did not take birth until the Atlantean period, so that the impetus given to the progress of the race was a cumulative force. The positions occupied by these divine beings from the Venus chain were naturally those of rulers, instructors in religion, and teachers of the arts, and it is the latter capacity that a reference to the arts taught by them comes to our aid in the consideration of the history of this early race. And that is where we left off last time. You see, the beings that incarnated here as the rulers and the teachers of the last of the Lemurian races that helped to evolve them and merge them into the next Atlantean civilization, the first root race of the Atlanteans, they came here and they taught them various things, much like we hear about in some of the biblical context, in the context of the book of Enoch, where the fallen angels began to teach mankind certain things, certain knowledge, certain skills, certain arts, and we see some of the crossover here now. But now let's pick up where we did indeed leave off. The arts continued. Under the guidance of their divine teachers, the people began to learn the use of fire, and the means by which it could be obtained, at first by friction, and later on by the use of flints and iron. They were taught to explore for metals, to smelt and to mold them, and instead of spears of sharpened wood, they now began to use spears tipped with sharpened metal. They were also taught to dig and till the ground, and to cultivate the seeds of wild grain, till it improved in type. This cultivation, carried on through the vast ages which have since elapsed, has resulted in the evolution of the various cereals which we now possess: barley, oats, maize, millet, etc. But an exception must be here noted. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So now, this is where things get interesting, because according to the secret schools and according to their secret doctrine, there are certain things, living things here on Earth, that did not evolve here naturally according to the Earth evolution. They came from elsewhere. They came from this evolutionary chain of Venus. And we're going to get into that here now. An exception must be here noted. Wheat was not evolved upon this planet like the other cereals. It was a gift of the divine beings who brought it from Venus, ready for the food of man. Nor was wheat their only gift. The one animal form whose type has not been evolved on our chain of worlds is that of the bee. It, too, was brought from Venus. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. The bee did not evolve here on Earth, according to the secret doctrine. Neither did wheat. They were brought here from Venus, according to the secret schools, or from the evolutionary chain of Venus. Now, you could read this all different ways. Is it talking symbolically or allegorically, or is it speaking physically here? Did these beings physically come and incarnate from the planet Venus, as we see it and know it and understand it today, and bring with them these two species, wheat and bees, to seed the earth and help the earth evolve and supply food for the evolving human beings on the earth? This is the claim. You see, bees have a very special place in our environment. Without bees, we would be in very dire straits, wouldn't we? Now, how did this happen? How could this be plausible? Well, they don't really explain. But if you think about the connotations of this could be massively important. And of course, you always hear in the cult of scientism and all of those who love to espouse ancient astronaut theory and stuff like this, they always love to say how perhaps the Earth was seeded from other worlds, how perhaps alien beings seeded this world and helped to guide and develop the evolution here. Interesting way of thinking, isn't it? Now you can see where the correlations come from. It always ties back to the occult, ladies and gentlemen. Every time. As much as I wish that wasn't the case, it always is. It's part of their secret doctrine. It's what they claim. Now, is it true? I don't know. I can't claim to know. Some things make more sense when you look at it through this lens of observation, and other things don't make any sense whatsoever. But this is the claim, and this is what some of these people believe. So regardless of whether you believe it or not, if you think it's total nonsense, that's irrelevant. What you need to understand, and I can't drive this point home enough, is that there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these things, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs will affect all of us. So therefore, understand what's being presented here. Whether it's true or not, take it into consideration and look with a new set of eyes at some of these things. And perhaps you'll have a better understanding as to why certain things are done in this world, and to another extent, how things are done in this world. You see, it supplies you with their motivations, these controllers of this place, these dark occultists who run things in this world, and make no mistake about it, at the very tippy top of the power pyramid of this world are these dark occultists who run things. And it's very likely that there are some type of non-human entities and or intelligences that sit above them and guide and direct things. You see, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in high spiritual places, the powers of darkness. These things are very real, folks. The spiritual battle is very real. They do everything in their power to try to get man to disbelieve in the spiritual in any type of way. They want to sell you the bill of goods that is materialist science. You see, that's the new god of this age. That's their god of the New Age, science. You don't trust the science. You don't believe the science. You see, to them, the science is the end-all, be-all. Not necessarily to those dark occultists at the top of the power structure, but all their minions and underlings beneath them that they use to get things done, the useful idiots. They believe in the paradigm of science, materialist science, secular humanism. Man can become God, man is God. Man will be God. Man, through his intellect, can become God. It's the Luciferian doctrine. They don't even realize it. They call it humanist. They call it humanism. They call it moral relativism. Oh, my truth and your truth. I have my truth and you have your truth. No, truth is truth, folks. There's only one truth. But they use this. This is a type of moral relativism. You see, to these people, there's no standard, no absolute standard of right and wrong. But we all know that this universe, this world, operates on certain natural laws and natural principles that are immutable. And yet these people all the time do everything in their power to invert these natural laws. They believe they can be the gods of this place. And they hold some of this ancient knowledge in secret as an advantage against the rest of us. That's what secrecy has always all been about. It's about holding power or sway over somebody else. That's why secrecy is one of the oldest mind control tools ever used. If you know something somebody else doesn't, that gives you an advantage over them. Now, if you leverage that by 1,000,000-fold, then you begin to see how you have real power over others. If they are completely ignorant as to who they are, where they come from, where they exist even, then they don't know where they could go, what they're doing, what their true potential is. They don't have a clue. You have them under your thumb. That's what's gone on within the auspices of these secret schools, this secret priestcraft that runs things behind the scenes from time immemorial. That's what this is talking about. These are the ones that hold this secret doctrine, as they like to call it in the Theosophical Society. Now, this permeates all the other secret society groups as well. Much of what the Theosophists have presented comes from other sources, primarily the Rosicrucians, the Hermetic Brotherhood, and older fraternities of this sort. Older ones. They've taken a lot of ideas from both Eastern and Western esotericism, combined them together, and presented this whole big mishmash that's called Theosophy. And it is a big mishmash. A lot of confusion involved with it. But they do present some really good ideas. And they do give you that kernel of truth, along with some of the dose of poison that is always injected in these types of things. But at any rate, let's get back to this. So this is what they teach. That when the Lemurian race was declining and the Atlanteans were on the rise, these beings from the Venusian, the Venus chain of evolution, began to incarnate here as leaders and teachers of those early races of man, and they presented them with certain gifts. Among these gifts were wheat and bees, which did not naturally evolve here on Earth, according to the secret doctrine. Let's continue. The Lemurians now also began to learn the art of spinning and weaving fabrics with which to clothe themselves. These were made of the coarse hair of a species of animal now extinct, but which bore some resemblance to the llamas of today, the ancestors of which they may possibly have been. We have seen above that the earliest articles of clothing of Lemurian men were robes of skin stripped from the beasts he had slain. These skins he still continued to wear on the colder parts of the continent, But he now learned to cure and dress the skin in some rude fashion. One of the first things the people were taught was the use of fire in the preparation of their food, and whether it was the flesh of animals they slew or the pounded grains of wheat, their modes of cooking were closely analogous to those we hear of as existing today among savage communities. With reference to the gift of wheat so marvelously brought from Venus, the divine rulers doubtless realized the advisability of at once procuring such food for the people, for they must have known that it would take many generations before the cultivation of the wild seeds could provide an adequate supply. Rude and barbarous as were the people during the period of the 5th and 6th subraces, such of them as had the privilege of coming in contact with their divine teachers were naturally inspired with such feelings of reverence and worship as helped to lift them out of their savage condition. The constant influx, too, of more intelligent beings from the first group of the lunar Petries, who were then beginning to return to incarnation, helped the attainment of a more civilized state. Gonna pause there. So now we're talking about the Lemurian race was beginning to become more civilized. This race of giants, remember, they were giants, folks, 12 to 15 feet tall on average, as described in this book. And they domesticated dinosaurs. You can't make this up. This is according to the secret doctrine. We went over that in one of the previous episodes here. But now we see they began to learn more. Metallurgy, the arts, how to develop clothing, how to cure skins into leathers, and things of this sort, how to cook, how to use fire as an instrument, how to cultivate food, how to farm. Next here is a portion of the book that says, Great cities and statues. During the later part of the 6th and the 7th subrace, they learned to build great cities. These appear to have been of Cyclopean architecture, corresponding with the gigantic bodies of the race. The first cities were built on the extended mountainous region of the continent, which included, as will be seen in the first map presented in this book, the present island of Madagascar. Another great city is described in the secret doctrine as having been entirely built of blocks of lava. It lay some 30 miles west of the present Easter Island, and it was subsequently destroyed by a series of volcanic eruptions. The gigantic statues of Easter Island, measuring, as most of them do, about 27 feet in height by 8 feet across the shoulders, were probably intended to be representative not only of the features, but of the height of those who carved them, or it may be of their ancestors, for it was probably in the later ages of the Lemuro-Atlanteans that the statues were erected. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So now the claim is, at one time, these giants were as large as 27 feet tall on average. That's the claim here, that these statues that we see on Easter Island were likely representations, life-size representations, accurate ones, of those beings from Lemuria. That is the claim. Let's continue. It will be observed that by the second map period presented in this book, the continent of which Easter Island formed a part had been broken up, and Easter Island itself had become a comparatively small island, though of considerably great dimensions than it retains today. I'm going to pause for another moment. Did you ever wonder, have you ever done any looking into Easter Island? Have you ever seen the stories about Easter Island on the History Channel, where they talk about the demise of Easter Island, and they really don't know what happened there? But this is said to be, by the secret doctrine, a remnant of this lost Lemurian continent, and civilization that thrived there. And these were the Moai. These statues called the Moai were representations of the actual people themselves that lived there back in antiquity. It's an interesting thing to think about. It doesn't make sense. Easter Island is in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing. It doesn't stand to reason. It doesn't make sense that such a small island had a flourishing civilization on it that could build those massive statues. It defies common sense and logic. And that's what makes it an intriguing topic. But now we see these claims, which very much predate anything you're presented on the History Channel with. This stuff was known in the secret doctrine by the secret schools. This is the claim. This is part of the lost Lemurian continent and the civilization thereof. You see, these civilizations always seem to have a cataclysmic end and a new beginning. The phoenix rising out of the ashes, symbolically, of course. And we'll see as we read on here, perhaps the same can be said here. Civilizations of comparative importance arose on different parts of the continent, and the great islands where the inhabitants built cities and dwelt in settled communities, but large tribes who were also partially civilized continued to lead a nomadic and patriarchal life, while other parts of the land, in many cases the least accessible, as in our own times, were peopled by tribes of extremely low type. Next portion here is titled Religion. With so primitive a race of men, at the best there was but little in the shape of religion that they could be taught. Simple rules of conduct and the most elementary precepts of morality were all that they were fitted to understand or to practice. During the evolution of the seventh subrace, it is true that their divine instructors taught them some primitive form of worship and imparted the knowledge of a supreme being whose symbol was represented as the sun. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So this was when man first began to understand the concept of God, a supreme being. And of course, they were directly taught that this supreme being was represented by the sun. A symbol, the sun. Destruction of the continent. Here we go. Unlike the subsequent fate of Atlantis, which was submerged by great tidal waves, the continent of Lemuria perished by volcanic action. It was raked by the burning ashes and the red-hot dust from numberless volcanoes. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, it is true, heralded each of the great catastrophes which overtook Atlantis, but when the land had been shaken and rent, the sea rushed in and completed the work, and most of the inhabitants perished by drowning. The Lemurians, on the other hand, met their doom chiefly by fire or suffocation. Another marked contrast between the fate of Lemuria and Atlantis was that while four great catastrophes completed the destruction of the latter, the former was slowly eaten away by internal fires, for from the time when the disintegrating process began towards the end of the first map period, there was no cessation from the fiery activity, and whether in one part of the continent or another, the volcanic action was incessant, while the invariable sequence was the subsidence and total disappearance of the land, just as in the case of Krakatoa in 1883. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So Lemuria met its end in volcanic ruin, was destroyed by the fire and the suffocation of the ash of volcanic activity. Did you ever wonder why when you watch any of these films depicting cavemen or prehistoric times, there always seems to be this volcanic activity present there, which when you think about it logically, wouldn't stand to reason that it would be present in that type of a situation, does it? Especially since they began espousing the idea that likely cataclysms that ended various historical or geological periods were things from outside the system, things like asteroids, meteor strikes, destroying life here on Earth in the past. But yet, every time you see the depiction of cavemen in a film, in a movie, Hollywood production, you'll notice there always seems to be some type of volcano or volcanic activity present there. Now, is this heralding back to the destruction of Lemuria? Possibly. We also know that Atlantis was destroyed in 4 different catastrophes, ultimately by the flood, the great flooding of the entire continent, which ultimately spelled their doom. And of course, it does say here that we have this relationship between these earthquakes and volcanic activity and those floods of Atlantis, but the thing is, Atlantis was destroyed by water, whereas Lemuria was destroyed by fire. And you can understand some various spiritual concepts wrapped up in that. Cyclical types of ways of thinking, going through the fire, going through the water, and we always have this dichotomy. We have these 2 elements in opposition, but they are necessary opposites. We have these forces at play in the cycles of time in this world. So the last great cataclysm we've seen before the modern era was a great flood, the destruction by water. And of course, we're told in Christian theology that the next destruction will be by fire. Fire. Thus we have baptism by water and baptism by fire. Now, fire could represent spirit. You could look at this in allegorical contexts. You could look at it through a hermeneutics lens. You see, hermeneutics is a type of study wherein various things have different layers or levels of meaning, depending upon the frame of reference that you look at it through. This is called hermeneutics. This is something that is known and inherent in Christian theology as well as other different applications. It's called hermeneutics, just in case you're interested in that kind of thing. So you can inherently pick out several different meanings in a layer of text, particularly in the biblical text. That's what hermeneutics primarily applies to, is to interpretation of Bible texts. But of course, you could apply this across the board in all of these other different fields of study as well. Same things are inherent through all different philosophies and times and cultures and religious doctrines. You can apply the hermeneutics lens to see things, even with writings like this, things from the Theosophical Society, You can see layers of meaning here. So is this a real, literal history of the world? Maybe, or maybe not. But it's amazing how all of these things have very similar foundations. It's all very cyclical in its operation. It all relates in many different ways, which don't seem obvious on a surface reading, but when you begin to delve deeper, you begin to see the connections. So what we have here is this idea that prehistoric man, this early progenitor of man, these giants, were destroyed by the constant volcanic activity on this southern continent of Lemuria. And they were cataclysmically destroyed. But the thing is, a remnant lived on and evolved into the Atlantean races. These are the claims of the secret doctrine. Like I said, are they true? I don't know. I don't claim to know. But what I do know is things begin to make a little more sense when you connect the dots with this stuff and things going on in the world today. Is there truly secret knowledge that a select few at the top of the power structure have been hiding from the rest of us? I think that's demonstrable. Is this the true nature of things? I don't know and I can't say. But if it is, it could be hugely important for us to know and understand. And if it's not, it's still hugely important for us to know and understand, because this is what they believe, and this is what they act upon. Those social controllers of this world. Those ones at the topmost levels of the power structure in this world. They think somehow they are more evolved on spiritual lines and possibly physical lines than you and I. They believe there's a master race. They believe there is a superior race of beings, ones who have the divine right to rule, and that perhaps their whole job here is to guide the rest of us into the next phase of evolution, much like those from this Venus chain of evolution allegedly came incarnated here in the Lemurian sub-races, the last several incarnations thereof, to guide and direct them into their next phase of evolution. And some of these people have been at the top of the power structure in this world today, these dark occultists who run things, have likely become so deluded, so self-absorbed with their own egos, that they think that perhaps they are some divine being come here, made incarnate into the modern-day human form to guide the rest of us into our next phase of evolution. And they think they're doing us a favor. You see, a lie is a lie is a lie. And it's a great lie. The great lie told in the Garden of Eden, you can be as gods. Well, some of these people, they believe they are gods. And they have the divine right to rule, and they are here to guide the rest of us because they know better, because they are more evolved than we are. And they've deluded themselves and lied to themselves, and they believe this. And they lead us down the primrose path. For the greater good, of course. For the development of the race, you see. And you wonder why there's racial tensions in this world. This is where all this crap comes from, folks, from their secret doctrine. That's the root of racism. It's in the secret doctrine. It's promulgated by these occult fraternities and secret society groups throughout the world, and the things they believe and espouse. And some of their secret doctrine has been adopted wholesale by various religious structures and connotations of this world. In some way, shape, or form, there are some who believe they are a superior people to others and have the divine right to rule over others and or destroy others for the greater good, for the future development of the race. And this is at the heart of all of it. Like I said, it always, always, always ties back to the occult. Each and every time. But let's go ahead and read on here. So closely analogous was the eruption of Mount Pelée, which caused the destruction of Saint-Pierre, the capital of Martinique, about 2 years ago. I'm going to pause for a moment. This was written back in the early 1900s. I believe it was 1904, if I remember correctly. So it's talking about a volcanic eruption in around 1902, if my time frame on this is correct. But I'm just going from memory, so I don't know. It could have been a little bit later, but no later than the 1910s or so. But at any rate, let's continue on. So he's comparing it to another, more modern volcanic eruption, where the whole series of volcanic catastrophes on the continent of Lemuria Let's start that again, sorry. So, closely analogous was the eruption of Mount Pelée, which caused the destruction of St. Pierre, the capital of Martinique, about 2 years ago, to the whole series of volcanic catastrophes on the continent of Lemuria, that the description of the former given by some of the survivors may be of interest. And he goes on to quote a description of this volcanic eruption of Mount Pelée. Quote, "An immense black cloud has suddenly burst forth from the crater of Mount Pelée and rushed with terrific velocity upon the city, destroying everything, inhabitants, houses, and vegetation alike, that it found in its path. In 2 or 3 minutes it passed over, and the city was a blazing pyre of ruins. In both islands, Martinique and St. Vincent, the eruptions were characterized by the sudden discharge of immense quantities of red-hot dust, mixed with steam, which flowed down the steep hillsides with an ever-increasing velocity. In St. Vincent, this had filled many valleys to a depth of between 100 and 200 feet, and months after the eruptions, they were still very hot, and the heavy rains which then fell thereon caused enormous explosions, producing clouds of steam and dust that shot upwards to a height from 1,500 feet to 2,000 feet, and filled the rivers with black boiling mud." End quote. That's an interesting description of a volcanic eruption of this type. Now picture that. They're saying the entire continent of Lemuria was kind of like this towards those end days of that race. Captain Freeman of the Rodham then described a thrilling experience which he and his party had at Martinique. One night, when they were lying at anchor in a little sloop about a mile from St. Pierre, the mountain exploded in a way that was apparently as an exact repetition of the original eruption. It was not entirely without warning, hence they were enabled to sail at once a mile or two further away, and thus probably saved their lives. In the darkness, they saw the summit glow with a bright red light. Then soon, with loud detonations, great red-hot stones were projected into the air and rolled down the slopes. A few minutes later, a prolonged rumbling noise was heard, and in an instant was followed by a red-hot avalanche of dust, which rushed out of the crater and rolled down the side with a terrific speed, which they estimated at about 100 miles an hour, with a temperature of 1,000 degrees centigrade. As to the probable explanation of these phenomena, no lava, he said, had been seen to flow from either of the volcanoes, but only steam and fine hot dust. The volcanoes were, therefore, of the explosive type, and from all his observations he had concluded that the absence of lava flows was due to the material within the crater being partly solid, or at least highly viscous, so that it could not flow like an ordinary lava stream. Since his return, this theory has received striking confirmation, for it was now known that within the crater of Mount Pelée there was no lake of molten lava, but that a solid pillar of red-hot rock was slowly rising upwards in a great conical, sharp-pointed hill, until it might finally overtop the old summit of the mountain. It was nearly 1,000 feet high, and slowly grew as it was forced upwards by pressure from beneath, while every now and then explosions of steam took place, dislodging large pieces from its summit or its sides. Steam was set free within this mass as it cooled, and the rock then passed into a dangerous and highly explosive condition, such that an explosion must sooner or later take place, which shivered a great part of the mass into fine red-hot dust. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So this gives a really apt and appropriate description of these violent types of eruptions of volcanoes that don't always necessarily involve lava slowly building over time. And this is what said how Lemuria came to its end. Across the entire continent, there was this volcanic activity which laid waste and ruin to the land and the people there. Let's read on. A reference to the first Lemurian map will show that in the lake lying in the southeast of the extensive mountain ranges, or the extensive mountainous region, there was an island which consisted of little more than one great mountain. This mountain was a very active volcano. The 4 mountains which lay to the southwest of the lake were also active volcanoes, and in this region it was that the disruption of the continent began. The seismic cataclysms which followed the volcanic eruptions caused such widespread damage that by the second map period a large portion of the southern part of the continent had been submerged. A marked characteristic of the land surface in early Lemurian times was the great number of lakes and marshes, as well as the innumerable volcanoes. Of course, all these are not shown on the map. Only some of the great mountains, which were volcanoes, and only some of the largest lakes are there indicated. Another volcano on the northeast coast of the continent began its destructive work at an early date. Earthquakes completed the disruption, and it seems probable that the sea, shown in the second map as dotted with small islands to the southeast of the present Japan, indicates the area of seismic disturbance. In the first map, it will be seen that there were lakes in the center of which is now the island continent of Australia. Lakes where the land is at present exceedingly dry and parched. By the second map period, those lakes had disappeared, and it seems natural to conjecture that the districts where those lakes lay must, during the eruptions of the great volcanoes which lay to the southeast between the present Australia and New Zealand, have been so raked with red-hot volcanic dust that the very water springs were dried up. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Australia, New Zealand, very far separated from other land masses. In the modern era, they were all connected at once and were part of this Lemurian continent, and it was a result of these cataclysmic volcanic eruptions that much of this changed, according to the secret doctrine. And next, we're going to look into the founding of the Atlantean race based upon this. You see, this is the fall of the giants, the fall of the Lemurians, and the rise of the Atlanteans, whose modern-day descendants call themselves the Olympians. And if you've been following this broadcast for any length of time, you know what I'm talking about. The Olympians. Committee of 300, anyone? But at any rate, let's move on here to the next portion of the book. And we're almost to the end. And we'll talk about what has become now of the world since this time, according to the secret doctrine. The founding of the Atlantean race. In concluding this sketch, a reference to the process by which the fourth root race was brought into existence will appropriately bring to an end what we know of the story of Lemuria and link it on to that of Atlantis. It may be remembered from previous writings on the subject that it was from the fifth, or Semitic subrace of the fourth root race, that was chosen the nucleus destined to become our great fifth, or Aryan root race. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So now, we're beginning to see some of these remnants from the Lemurian and Atlantean civilizations rearing their ugly head in modern times. We have this notion of various root races, and how the Semitic fourth root race, or sub-race, the fifth sub-root race of the fourth root race, they were chosen and destined to be the nucleus of the great fifth root race, fifth sub-race of the fourth root race, the Aryan root race. Now, I know some of this gets convoluted and confusing, because you have all this mention of races and root races, and like I said, the heart of racism, the root of racism, comes directly from these secret society groups, from their secret doctrine. The whole teaching of Darwinian evolution is based on this. These racist ideologies. All you have to do is look at the subtitle of the book, Darwin's book, that made him so famous about the evolution of species. Look it up. You'll see what the subtitle is. It's about preferred races. It's all based in eugenics ideologies, folks. And it's all taken from this absolute garbage that they teach in the secret schools. Let's read on. It says, "It was not, however, until the time of the 7th sub-race on Lemuria that humanity was sufficiently developed psychologically or physiologically to warrant the choice of individuals fit to become the parents of a new root race. So it was from the 7th sub-race that the segregation was effected. The colony was first settled on land which occupied the site of the present Ashanti and western Nigeria. A reference to the second map will show that this is a promontory lying to the northwest of the island continent which embraced the Cape of Good Hope and parts of western Africa. Having been guarded for generations from any admixture with a lower type, the colony gradually increased in numbers, and the time came when it was ready to receive and to hand on the new impulse to physical heredity, which the Manu was destined to impart." Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. So once again, we see this notion of selective breeding of this one small group. These are eugenics ideas, going back way further than what the modern interpretation or the modern advent of eugenics is. It's inherent in their secret doctrine. This is where it comes from. Like I said, always ties back to the occult, all of it. Let's read on. "Students of Theosophy are aware that, up to the present day, no one belonging to our humanity has been in a position to undertake the exalted office of Manu, though it is stated that the founding of the coming 6th root race will be entrusted to the guidance of one of our masters of wisdom, one who, while belonging to our humanity, has nevertheless reached a most exalted level in the divine hierarchy. In the case we are considering, the founding of the 4th root race, it was one of the adepts from Venus who undertook the duties of the Manu. Naturally, he belonged to a very high order, for it must be understood that the beings who came here from the Venus system as rulers and teachers of our infant humanity did not all stand at the same level. It is this circumstance which furnishes a reason for the remarkable fact that may, in conclusion, be stated, namely, that there existed in Lemuria a lodge of initiation." Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. You see, even back in antiquity, initiation into the secret society groups was of utmost importance. A lodge of initiation was made by these Venusians who incarnated here and were the teachers and rulers. They established these lodges of initiation. I'll let you interpret what you want about that. Apply a little discernment to this, and maybe you'll begin to understand how the wholesale manipulation of the egos of men had come into being at a very early stage in our development. The hijacking of a natural process had begun by powers external to here, spiritual powers external to here. And are some of these same intelligences or spiritual powers still guiding and directing things today? I'll let you make the connections between Venus, the bright and morning star, and what we've been taught in the Bible about a certain being fallen from heaven. You can make your own connections there. But let's read on, because now it's going to tell us about this Lodge of Initiation. Naturally, it was not for the benefit of the Lemurian race that the Lodge was founded. Such of them as were sufficiently advanced were, it is true, taught by the adept gurus, but the instruction they required was limited to the explanation of a few physical phenomena, such as the fact that the earth moves round the sun, or to the explanation of the different appearances which physical objects assumed for them when subjected alternately to their physical sight and their astral vision. It was, of course, for the sake of those who, while endowed with the stupendous powers of transferring their consciousness from the planet Venus to this our Earth, and of providing for their use and their work well here appropriate vehicles in which to function, were yet pursuing the course of their own evolution. For their sake it was, for the sake of those who, having entered the path, had only reached the lower grades, that this Lodge of Initiation was founded. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So the Lodge of Initiation wasn't for the Lemurians. It was for these other beings, these superior beings. And you see how they've taken that idea and brought it forward today. They think they are superior. They're more evolved. They only get initiated into the brotherhood if they're worthy. If they are one of these exalted beings, they're different than the rest. You see, there's many that believe you don't even have a soul unless you're initiated into one of their secret society groups. They think very low, very lowly of the masses of humanity. They think of us as a bunch of dumb animals that need to be guided along, told what to do. Stupid monkeys. That's how they think of you. And you see how this haughty spirit, this prideful spirit, has taken hold in these secret society groups, in these lodges of initiation, claiming their superiority, claiming their evolutionary superiority over the rest. And are they deluding themselves? Do they think they are some superior being from some other evolutionary chain, some other planet, who have incarnated in this current earthly human form to help guide the rest of us? Do they really believe that? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. It seems that that's kind of what's being implied here. But let's go ahead and continue on. So it says it was for the sake of those who, having entered the path, had only reached the lower grades that this Lodge of Initiation was founded. Though, as we know, the goal of normal evolution is greater and more glorious than can, from our present standpoint, be well imagined, It is by no means synonymous with that expansion of consciousness which, combined with and alone made possible by the purification and ennoblement of character, constitute the heights to which the pathway of initiation leads. The investigation into what constitutes this purification and ennoblement of character, and the endeavor to realize what that expansion of consciousness really means, are subjects which have been written of elsewhere. Suffice it now to point out that the founding of a lodge of initiation for the sake of beings who came from another scheme of evolution is an indication of the unity of object and of aim in the government and guidance of all the schemes of evolution brought into existence by our solar logos. Apart from the normal course in our own scheme, there is, we know, a path by which he may be directly reached, which every son of man in his progress through the ages is privileged to hear of, and to tread if he so chooses. We find that this was so in the Venus scheme also, and we may presume it is or will be so in all the schemes which form part of our solar system. This path is the path of initiation, and the end to which leads is the same for all, and that end is union with God. And that's the end of the reading here. So this is what they believe. They believe that initiation into these secret society groups is the path leading to God, to union with God, the solar logos. That this lodge of initiation is for those beings who come from another scheme of evolution, not for anybody here now, not the present race, the current mankind, but only those select few who incarnate here from some other scheme of evolution. You see, they think they're different, they think they're better, they think they're superior. They think that the mere act of them becoming initiated into one of these secret society groups is their justification for their action. They believe that they could only be initiated if they are one of these souls from another scheme of evolution, that they are somehow superior. They're divine here. They truly believe themselves to be divine, folks. They think they are really the gods of this place. Now, it's not to say that those who just get involved in these secret society groups, get initiated into the lower levels thereof, truly understand what they're being involved with, or getting involved with. I don't think they have a friggin' clue. Let's be honest. The vast majority of Freemasons don't have a friggin' clue what they're involved with. It's only when you reach the highest, most levels of these groups that you come across this type of information wherein you somehow are led to believe that you are different, you are superior. You've come here from a different scheme of evolution. You are a superior or godlike being. But you're manifesting in this finite human form here as part of your karmic duty to guide man into further evolution. Do you see how it becomes very contorted and twisted and convoluted very quickly? And why it is some of these people at these high levels in the power structure of this world seem to think that they are doing a good work. They're performing a great work. The great work. They have the hubris to think themselves superior to the rest of us. They don't view themselves as being mere human beings. Not the ones at the highest, most echelons of these secret orders. They see themselves as being divine. They're from elsewhere, here to guide mankind through these troubled times, to help man evolve to the next level. And although the idea sounds noble, we see what's become of this noble idea in the name of the quote-unquote greater good. This is what's happened. Man's ego, man's self-inflated ego, has gotten in his way. He's twisted and contorted some of the old teachings, taken this knowledge, applied it in a dark way for his own benefit and not for the benefit of mankind himself. Secreted it away to the hidden chambers of these secret society groups and the occult fraternities, and used it for the advancement of a small select few in this world to positions of power and influence for their own self-gratification, and they've passed it on through the generations to their progeny and to those that they deem worthy. Those select few who have the potential, who follow the initiatory guiding process, and withhold the secrets and keep the secrets and take the blood oaths, protect the secrets of the ages, protect their fellow brothers, their fellow travelers in this place. They're strangers in a strange land, you see. They think they come from some outlying scheme or outside scheme of evolution. When you begin to understand what's inferred here, then you begin to really see a clear picture of why the world is in the shape that it is in. Because you have a small select few in charge of things here, running the show here, who think that they are some separate type of species from you and I. Now, there are some who have called this a breakaway civilization, and it is a breakaway civilization of sorts. And there are others who would outright claim that these are aliens or extraterrestrials, and you can see the comparison when you look at what we've been presented with here with the secret doctrine. You can see how the correlation connects. So it seems all these bits of research across time and culture and across these different movements within the greater truth movement community, whatever you want to call this conspiratorial type way of thinking, where they're connecting the different dots and approaching these subjects from different vantage points. You can see where the dots are beginning to connect, and that they're not wrong. You see those folks out there claiming that there's aliens manipulating mankind. Well, they're not entirely wrong, are they? It's a matter of your perspective. Then you also have those that say, well, it's a demonic influence. They're not wrong either. You see, this is something that has been weaponized against us as well, dividing these people into different branches of research, dividing these people along different lines of reasoning, and having them infighting with one another and disagreeing with one another as to what the true nature of this thing is, even though they are both describing the same thing from different vantage points. And this is something that has become hugely problematic in the modern quote-unquote truth movement. We fight over stupid disagreements, infighting. The whole alternative research community has been upended in this way. You have all of this sniping that goes on back and forth from these various researchers, one at the other, even though they are all describing exactly the same thing, just from a different vantage point or perspective. And they can't seem to put two and two together and realize it's all related. And all you have to do to find that is to go back, find these old books, these old writings within these various secret schools talking about their secret doctrine. It's all right there. And then you could see the various extrapolations that have been made on this secret doctrine. And yet people will waste their time trying to discredit one another, rather than affirming that, hey, we each have a piece of this puzzle, and we can have a greater understanding as to the nature of this if we just work together and share what it is we've learned with an open mind, without rolling our eyes at one another, or calling each other a shill, or calling each other, what's the term, a baby truther or some such thing. There's all these different derogatory terms that have come up, and this is something that's only very recent, over the course of the past 5 years or so. This used to be a much more open-minded community of people, more willing to listen to different ideas, instead of just outright claiming something is totally wrong or ignorant, or you don't know what you're talking about, or I know better than you, I know more than you. That's not helpful. But sadly, that's what's become of this. It's been weaponized. It's been done on purpose in this way. You see, they have various proponents that infiltrate different grassroots type movements, different areas, spread different ideas, and then we wind up with people disagreeing on a lot of different things, and then wasting endless mental cycles, fighting back and forth, infighting about the true nature of our reality, where it is we exist, who we are, where we come from, where we're going. Is the Earth a globe, a sphere flying through the vast regions of empty, infinite space? Or is it a flat plane covered by a dome? We'll fight over that. That's what happens in the modern-day truth movement. And if you accept the flat Earth, well, you can't possibly accept extraterrestrial aliens coming from other planets. You don't accept the model of planets as expressed by the mainstream, and vice versa. If you believe in the globe model handed us by NASA and other places, then you can't give any credence to any flat Earth ideologies or ways of thinking. You can't possibly accept that maybe there's a dome, a firmament that surrounds this place that separates us from the vastness of what we call quote-unquote space, and what the true nature of space is. And people will infight over this. And the truth is, none of us really knows. We don't know the true nature of where it is we exist, or what's beyond this place. But we do have some important concepts that are presented to us that unify us in thought and action and principle. And we don't focus on that. Instead, we spend our time fighting over those other things that separate us all the further. And then we get cordoned off into our own little private echo chambers. And it's not right. Like I said, this used to be a much more open-minded community where we could exchange and express ideas and consider them perhaps whimsically, perhaps in good fun, or perhaps take it seriously if we see some value to it, and move on. Not be hostile towards one another, or not give it consideration because it doesn't align with what my current belief is. But you see, in doing that, we've become no better than the mainstream. We don't know. That's what the answer to all of it is at the end of the day. We don't know. We don't know what our real history was. We don't know the true nature of our reality. We really don't know. So we can't make any positive affirmations in that kind of a way. But that doesn't mean we cannot discern truth. We can still discern truth. We know truth. We recognize truth. Truth stands on its own. And we can see that, and we can express that. And sometimes we can view that from different perspectives. And we could respect other people's perspective of it. I like to use the analogy, you've probably seen the picture where it's two people standing on opposite sides of one another, and on the ground there's a number written. To the one person it looks like a number 6, and to the other person it looks like a number 9. And the one says 6 and the other one says 9. Well, they're both right, aren't they? The same thing can be said in much of how we view this. Now, we have different researchers that approach these things from different angles, and they bring something of value to the table. Something that deserves consideration. But yet there's so many of us that will outright dismiss out of hand without seeing the evidence thereof, and that is wrong. And in weaponizing this alternative research-based community in the way that the mainstream and the controllers of this world have, they've turned it into an absolute shame from what it used to be. It's just infighting. It's just a distraction. It's just a cul-de-sac. A never-ending cul-de-sac. Your echo chamber. You wind up in an echo chamber. And just keep trying to reaffirm those things that you already have as extant beliefs. When in reality, you should be able to consider the ideas and perspectives of others, but also see how it correlates to your own perspective. That's what we've lost sight of. We've lost sight of what is the common bond that holds us together. And I think that's a shame. And a lot of people actually just pursue this type of knowledge as a form of entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with being entertained. I think they've actually coined the phrase conspiratainment, conspiracy culture. We have this whole notion of a conspiracy culture. It's fun to think about these things at times, isn't it? But to those who seriously research some of this, it's not always a positive thing to get lumped together with the conspiratainment portion. Now, don't get me wrong, I like to consider the possibilities and look at all these different angles of things, the old coast-to-coast AM type of way of thinking, the art bell, conspiracy entertainment. I like that. It makes your mind operate. It makes you think. But of course, we know a lot of that. A lot of these things that come out are either fanciful fiction, or they're there to throw you off the path. A lot of times there's operatives out there purposely giving misinformation and disinformation to people. But there's also sincere researchers who have found certain things that don't add up and just present what they find. And it's okay to consider these. It's okay to be entertained, but the thing is, if you're not learning anything of value from it, there comes a time to put it down, put it away. The problem with that is there's always value to be found. So when you stop finding value and you stop learning something new, that's when it becomes problematic, because that's when you start to fall into the echo chamber effect. And then you're just reaffirming those things that you already believe, and it doesn't lead you anywhere. It doesn't lead you any further into finding anything closer to actual truth. Because you're just reaffirming what you already believe. It's the cognitive dissonance. That's right, even those in the conspiracy culture and the truther community and whatever moniker you want to give this type of information, they fall into that category too, and all of a sudden they shut their minds down to other aspects of things, other possibilities, because they believe this very firm one stance on a particular topic or subject. And it overtakes all the other considerations of all the other classifications of study. And maybe they're correct and maybe they're not. I'm not one to say. But if you begin to close your mind down to new information, just based upon something you think you know, you could be missing something very important. Because that's the point. We don't really know anything. So if you think you know that you know that you know, and somebody comes out and says something contrary to what you know, and you just scoff at it and don't even give it consideration or look into it at all and dismiss it out of hand, that is where the problem comes in. And that's the kind of thing that we've come across with a lot of this. A lot of people would look at the notion of Atlantis or Lemuria and say, well, that's silly. I don't care about that. What does that have to do with anything? It's all just a myth. It's a fairy tale. Your storybooks. People talk about the Bible like that too, don't they? It's a storybook. It's a fairy story. The invisible man in the sky. Ha 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 ha. You know what? One day, they'll learn the truth. That it counts and it matters more than you know. That there's a spiritual core to our reality that transcends all of this. And that we shouldn't scoff at anything just because we think we know better. You don't. You really don't. You only know what you could perceive through your five senses. I only know what I could perceive through my five senses. And what I could repeat, perhaps. But we have a very finite understanding of the truth of our reality. And all we could do is share some of these ideas, share some of these traditions, look into a lot of these different avenues of thought and connect the dots. I never in a million years thought I would be exploring some of these works that I've been exploring. Some of these subjects, I never had any interest in. Atlantis, and never even heard of Lemuria in my youth. I just thought it was a myth. Fanciful fiction, an old story. Nothing to be taken seriously. Well, come to find out, there are people who have taken it seriously, and there does seem to be a chain of historical documentation of this place. Seems to really have been a place that may have existed at one point, a culture that existed at one point. And that it has everything to do with everything going on today. I always thought, when I was in high school, history was boring. History is far from boring, folks. The more you dig into the history that we can find, the more you find that the world is a much different place than you were ever taught, than you ever realized. It's a much bigger, vaster world than you can imagine. Even in your NASA model of spinning on a rock through space, the infinite void, the world is vastly bigger than even that, in so many ways that we can't even fathom. There's always more to learn. It says in the Bible, of the writing never books, it will never cease. All is vanity. It's the book of Ecclesiastes, one of my favorite reads. Vanity of vanities. It's a grasping after wind. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything. It's astounding. The more you think you know, the less you really do. The more you learn, the more questions you wind up with. And I think that's one of the beautiful aspects of life. The mystery. That's why they call them the mystery schools. It's exploring this mystery of life, of consciousness, of the nature of reality. It's one of the beautiful aspects of life. It's contemplating these things, seeking after these things, learning, ever learning about this stuff, but not losing sight of the spiritual implication thereof. Once again, I'm reminded of a Bible verse, ever learning but never able to come to the knowledge of truth. Well, you could come to the knowledge of truth and still be ever learning. But when you're ever learning without coming to the knowledge of truth, that's when things become problematic for you. That's when you become lost in this type of paradigm. When you begin to think you may know something, and then you completely disregard any evidence that provides a contrary view to that. Refuse to even explore that avenue of thought. That's when it becomes problematic. Like I like to say, I need to keep an open mind, but not so open that my brain falls out. That's why I always caution you with all of these things that we look at and we read through, take it with a grain of salt. Is it true? I don't know. Could it be true? Maybe. And if it is, well, it's fascinating. And if it's not, it's still fascinating, and there's value to be found in these stories, in these histories, these alleged histories that have been recorded here. We see so many underlying foundational things that connect the dots across all different times and cultures and ways of thinking, that we know there's a kernel of truth there, and it's exploring this kernel of truth that is fulfilling. Especially when you realize, what's the nature of that true kernel of truth? Well, it leads you to the Creator, to God. That's what it's pointing to. Won't necessarily lead you there, but that's what it points to. That's what the core of the mystery truly is God, the Creator himself. And we as human beings, we have this unction, this yearning in our soul for God. And sometimes we seek him in all the wrong places. And this is a known commodity in psychology. And to those dark occultists who run things in this world, they know we have this yearning for relationship with God. And they also understand that there's nothing else that can fill that void, but man will seek to fill that void with everything else, especially anything that promises him some semblance of being like God, being akin to God, or possibly becoming one with God, or becoming God himself. This is what could quite simply be described in the Christian theological framework as a spirit of Antichrist. This replacement of God with something else. A false God, a different God, an ulterior God. Oftentimes, man will deify himself. Think of himself as God. That's what has been done by those dark occultists at the top of the power structure in this world. They think of themselves as gods, as we've explored here in this writing. They have, in their own minds, affirmed themselves as God when they are nothing of the sort. But they espouse the old axiom, I think, therefore I am. And it's through this hubris that they've decided to keep these secret teachings from the masses and use them for themselves to maintain their status as gods among men, or so they see themselves. And they keep this secret doctrine tucked away for their own initiates into their orders. But of course, through the modern-day advent of the internet, we now have these resources available to all of us. And I think that there's some type of a kernel of truth to much of what is presented. But I also know that there's a little bit of poison always mixed with it. And I also realize that this information is only available to us because, well, those dark occultists who run things in this world, they think they have such a firm grasp of control right now that they don't care that this stuff is getting out. And it also has to do with the cycles of time that we're going through. We're living in the time of revelation. All this stuff that was done in darkness is coming to light now. It's a natural part of the cycles of time, and I think we're going to be on the ascendant here through this coming cycle of time. All these things are coming to the light of day, whereas they were always kept in darkness. And a lot of that is part and parcel of the times we're in. Revelatory times, times of revelation. Things are going to be seen, the veils being torn away. All those things that were hidden for a long time from the masses are now coming out into the open. And this all has to do with the cycle of time we're in. And I think these dark occultists who run things, they understand that to a certain degree. So they let it trickle out, knowing full well that they have no choice in the matter, that this stuff's going to see the light of day. So it's what they call a controlled release. And we see this happens in the intelligence community with different military matters and things like that, technologies. It's called a controlled release, where they let out some information a little at a time. And see, these dark occultists who run things, they know it's inevitable because of the cycles of time and the place in time where we exist right now, the part of the cycle, that this stuff's going to happen. So they can keep fighting to try to keep these things hidden, or they could do a controlled release. And of course they'll do the controlled release because that gives them more power and control over the information. And they think they have done their jobs well enough enslaving mankind up to this point that they're pretty confident that nobody's paying attention anyway. And they could let this stuff out in the open and nobody will believe it anyhow. And that's one of the reasons why we have access to this stuff now. We live in an information age, but it's also an age of big data. And we see the censorship is starting to clamp down harder. Because I think a lot of this information is getting out much more quickly than what they would like. So they're trying to clamp down on that. They don't need people waking up in droves. And people are waking up in droves. They're beginning to panic. They know their time is short. They know the time is short. They're doing their best to prolong their days of controlling humanity or guiding humanity. As they see it as them guiding humanity into this next phase of evolution, and perhaps their notion of evolution is what they truly think is the best thing, and they think that ultimately the only way to get there is to go through another type of cataclysm, much as has been shown in the past in their secret doctrine here, with other of the races of men of the past, that in order for us to eventually evolve to this next phase, we need to go through cataclysm, and they fully intend to lead us there. You see, they think they're doing the great work by doing so. That they are giving us a jump start on evolution to the next phase. We are definitely living in interesting times, folks. That's all I can say about that. We're living in interesting times, and we're seeing a lot of things come to fruition in the world today that 20 years ago I never would have even conceived of. And yet here we are. In order to understand where we're going, we have to know where we've been, and that's why looking into works like this is so important. Because even if it's not true, it gives us a glimpse into what those in positions of power believe is true about our past and about the cycles of time. And when we understand that this is what they believe in, what they act on, then we can understand why they do the things they do, what is their modus operandi. That's massively important. So we need to look at this. We need to look back in time to see what's coming in the future. We need to go back to the future. You just thought it was a clever name for a movie, didn't you? They've told us all along in the entertainment. Things they're doing, things they know. The clues are out there. We just didn't realize it until we begin to really look into the symbology. Then we begin to understand. So we see here, in conclusion tonight, these gifts from Venus and the fall of the giants. Well, we see the Lemurians were destroyed in a cataclysm, much like the Atlanteans were destroyed in a cataclysm. It's just the Lemurians who predated the Atlanteans. They were giants. They were a race or stock of mankind that was much different than we are now. Was a little bit closer to the astral or etheric or spiritual side of things than we are now. Had more vision into spiritual things. Operated in ignorance. The mindless sin. That's what they talked about in this Theosophical book here. These mindless beings who were later gifted with the divine spark in the later phases of Lemurian evolution. And of course, ultimately a remnant passed on into the Atlantean culture, but much of which died out. And they say that there are those who incarnated here from a scheme of evolution elsewhere to guide this along, and they brought us gifts. Gifts that are very important symbols to the secret schools. The bee and wheat. And if you look at those symbols, you'll see them all over the place, representing various things, representing civilization, industry, that is the bee, and wheat, the fasces of wheat, bundled together, representing government, governance, control, structure, organization, Saturnian ideas, the fasces of wheat, and you'll see them on the back of the dime. And the symbolism runs much deeper still. That's just one layer of meaning, but these things have become engrafted in our mind in very many ways, and they represent something archetypal. And of course, according to the secret doctrine, they don't come from this scheme of evolution. They come from elsewhere. And this is the really telling thing, because you see, without the bee, life on Earth would cease to exist. So this represents something else, symbolically as well. This represents something far greater. The seed of life. The divine spark. That's the symbol that the bee and the wheat represent. The divine spark. And of course, you could go all different ways in looking at this. But this is what's claimed, and you could take it allegorically or you could take it literally. Do bees really belong here? Did they evolve here? Well, I don't think the world would exist in the way that it does now without bees. So I don't think they were introduced here at a later time. I think they've always been extant here. You see, that's one explanation that defies logic. How did these things all evolve independently of one another? The flowers need the bees to pollinate them, and the bees need the flowers in order to survive. It all came together in a continuum, all at the same time. One thing didn't evolve separately from the other and find something to mate with and become something else. That all sounds nonsensical. But yet we're handed these types of ideas. So who knows? Maybe I'm wrong about that, or maybe this is all meant to be interpreted symbolically. Or maybe it's true, I don't know. I'm just curious to see what they say about the octopus now. What planetary scheme of evolution does that come from? Because they say that's like nothing else on Earth if you follow any of the mainstream science. So I find that interesting. But that's a subject for another day. At any rate, I want to thank you all for tuning in. That's all the time we do have for tonight. I want to let you know I appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll catch you here next time. Have a good night now.
We can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Show.